Okay, well, we should dive in. Just as a reminder, so
Yeah.
our panel, uh, let's see.
Let me just
Yeah,
do it.
yeah, you do that.
Okay.
And then we'll introduce the panel and then we'll go.
So those of you that are from the West, I know we didn't have class, just hopefully you had a chance to watch the videos though, because we won't be reteaching on this Q&A call. So if you aren't sure some of the things being talked about on this Q&A, just, watch the recording later after you watch the core videos on the website. Also, just wanted to point out to you that there are handouts on the website that might be helpful. There is a outline of the whole consequence video because there was so much information. We just typed it up for you. I also made a consequence decision tree. Dave and I had a different one that we used, but similar. But it's just nice to put something maybe on your fridge to reference when you're upset or you're trying to process, do I give my kid a consequence or not? This little sheet I made just asks you some questions. So, and I'm always welcome to feedback if you have another idea that I can add to it. Also, this decision tree references the outline, the consequence outline, just so you know. And then lastly, there is a freedoms and privilege checklist. So if you're noticing certain behavioral problems, this document gives you suggested virtues that might need to be worked on in order for the child to have that freedom. So anyway, I just want to make sure you know those are available on the website.
Okay, and just
And
as
then real quick.
Yeah, just so as a reminder, our panel for tonight's questions that have been submitted is Phil and Bree Sawyer. I was going to say where they are, but they're in different places on everyone's screen. But anyway,
you can raise your hand.
Yeah, Phil and Bree, Raul and Veronica Ramirez, Ari Steed, and then we're super happy this evening that Erin Chavez is able to join us, and she'll introduce a little bit about herself when she responds to a question. But we're super grateful for all you guys that took time with these questions to field them. So we're going to dive right in for the sake of time.
Okay.
And did you just want to start with one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Erin, just when you are ready to share, you can share a little bit about your story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question that was submitted is, how do you communicate with your child or communicate to your child that because of their inappropriate behavior, they are forfeiting a freedom? So if your child is forfeiting a freedom due to their inappropriate behavior, how do you effectively communicate that to them? And the Ramirez's had signed up for that one.
Okay. All right. So how to communicate with your child that because of their inappropriate behavior, they are forfeiting freedoms. That is really hard to do at first, but once you get the hang of it, it gets a little bit easier and easier. I think being able to teach the children that their actions have consequences, it's really, really important. Our behaviors affect relationships. And so when we either abuse or misuse our freedoms, we can either hurt ourselves or we can hurt others, and we also hurt God. So the way we taught this is, well, how do you hurt God? And we hurt God because we're all his children. And when we behave in appropriate ways, when we hurt others, that means that we are not considering the preciousness of others. So that's something that we had to teach our son is, well, why is it important that our behavior, and that in our behavior, we love others, we show kindness and respect, because we want to show the preciousness of others, because God shows us that preciousness. Like we're all precious to God, and we want to be able to honor God in the way we treat each other. And so these are privileges and freedoms that we get to have For example, freedom with our words. We realized that our son had taken a lot of verbal freedoms that we hadn't really talked through and talked to him about. And so we had to acknowledge these, but one of them was with his friends when he's playing with his friends. I know this question comes around a lot, but when he's playing with his friends and he's interacting with them, he tended to be really unkind. And so we had to say, okay, if you can't treat your children, I mean, not your children, if you can't treat your friends with kindness, then do you think you should have the freedom to play with them? And so, of course, he come to the conclusion that, well, no, if I don't know how to treat my friends well, then no, you actually forfeit the freedom to be able to interact with your friends. So freedoms are something that you get to have when you use them well, when you treat others properly, when you're a good steward of your things. If you don't do those things, then you're actually giving up those freedoms. That means you can't handle them. You can't have them if you're not taking care of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I have. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's been, I mean, specifically talking about that example when it came to the freedoms, because he was, they would, rough house and kind of in the interest of having fun, they would roast each other and it's been really cool to see him mature and grow through that. We recently had a situation with another parenting couple, another couple and their kids. And it was really neat to see how he's now able to help a younger child. Our son's 14, and I think this other kid is I think 12 or 11. And so it's been really neat to see how he's been growing in that area, and now he's able to help other kids through that process of helping him understand, because God was able to show us how to implement these loss of privileges. It's now been cool to see him develop and help other kids that are less. He's further along in the Christian walk, obviously, so it's been kind of cool. The other thing too is I would say is that it's really important that we really highlight that it's not us that are taking away privileges. That's huge.
Yeah.
That it's actually his actions that have now caused him to forfeit those privileges.
Yeah.
And this is so crucial. And when we first started this whole process, my wife was saying that it was really hard. Well, it was hard because oftentimes we took it personal. And by we, I mean me. Whenever he would say something, and then oftentimes I would end up saying something that was maybe unkind myself or inappropriate or judgmental. And so it took away from the power of the lesson. Oftentimes I now would have to apologize and seek forgiveness for something that I didn't do correctly. And so it almost kind of took away from the lesson that we were really trying to teach our son. And so by staying neutral, staying prayerful, staying above reproach, and not taking things personal, not being patient with the child, that's all crucial. And then really emphasizing that it's not us taking away privileges, but rather it's them and their actions that have those consequences that now lead to their loss of privileges.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to add on to that. You said, you used an example of your son losing the privilege of because he, of maybe talking or spending time with his friends because of his verbal lack of self-control. What we really want to encourage parents to consider too is how's your child treating their siblings and how's your child treating you? And often, parents will still allow their kid the full freedom to communicate on their phones or with their friends, but yet their children are being rude and unkind to them, and their children are being rude and unkind to their siblings. And you just have to, again, do they have the freedom to be hanging and communicating with their friends if they don't have the self-control to be kind and loving to the very people God put in their house? And those relationships are more important than any outside the house at this time in this stage of their life. So yes, I just want to encourage you to consider their verbal freedoms with their friends and on their phones or computers or whatever, if they're losing that or they're unkind with you or the siblings. Okay,
So
moving on.
I had one thing to add, and then I'll read the next question, and that is, that question was, especially if you just joined us, how do I communicate to my kid that they're losing a freedom or that they're forfeiting a freedom because of their behavior? And I think this harkens back to earlier classes, right? If you are not intentionally training your children in the virtues that are going to be required to handle these freedoms, then this conversation becomes way harder. But if you are thinking and talking with your spouse or your parent partner about, okay, these are the freedoms that I like for my son or my daughter to have, what are the virtues they need to demonstrate in order to be able to handle this, and you note those things, and then you talk to your child about them.
Yeah.
Now that conversation of, hey, honey, I see that you don't currently have the maturity to handle this particular freedom, and here's what I'm observing, right? It's so much easier to have that conversation if it is a follow along than a surprise attack. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Okay, question 2 is still the Ramirez's. How do you explain to your child that freedoms are earned based on their maturity to handle a specific freedom?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did you guys have anything you wanted to add, even though it's sort of a similar question?
Yeah, I think the only thing I added was what you just mentioned, Dave, that we learned really early on that we had given our child way too many. And so we kind of had to go back and be like, okay, that means we haven't really trained. And so it's kind of unfair to just take away, freedoms from our kids without really explaining the reason behind it.
Didn't do this on it. Another one.
I didn't know them. I told you the volleyball stuff.
Hold on.
Alex, you're
There we-
unmuted. Oh, there they. Okay, so I think because they had already become an expectation, we had to go back to the training. The other thing I noticed is that we were inconsistent with our training. So sometimes we would let it slide, and sometimes we'd be like, no, okay, this is what we said. And so that caused a lot of frustration also in our child.
And we had to apologize.
Yeah, and we had to apologize. So yep, we had to apologize and about all the mistakes we were making. We had to apologize for not being consistent. We had to apologize that we had allowed him to have a behavior that was just not acceptable, with us. And like you said, Tammy, the way they're treating you. So, I mean, we had everything you mentioned, we had going on in our home.
Mhm.
So we just really had to sit down and explain, hey, this is the way we are doing things. And, these freedoms that you get to have, they're earned. You can't just have them because they can be detrimental to the relationships if you don't use them in a proper way.
Yeah.
And so I think that also establishing the trust, letting him know that this is the way God has put us in your life to help you figure out what freedoms are good for you to handle or basically be able to have. And so developing the trust, it really all started with training virtue. And I think as we began training more on virtue, the trust just came, he just started trusting us with the boundaries we were setting, with the consequences even. I mean, I think it's just been amazing to see how God has been working.
It's awesome.
I was going to say, I think, and I shared this in the last session, that planting the seed early, this whole idea of teaching your children from a very early age, the sooner the better. This whole idea that God has put us in the parents in an authority role over the child, that really we are mentors to our children. and that we're going to be mentors for the rest of their lives. And I mentioned earlier that I think it was the Retears that mentioned this, that the book of Proverbs was written by Solomon to his adult children. And that really impacted me, and it helped me to understand this concept that, yeah, we're actually going to be the mentors of our children. We never stop parenting. Sure, the dynamic may change, that it's more of an influence rather than authoritarian, but as they get older. But this whole idea that we're going to be mentors to our children, we were planting that seed from a very early age. And so even like starting at 12, we started teaching biblical parenting late. We started when he was, I think, 11 or 12. And so, you know, a word of encouragement to the parents out there: it's never too late to start. And we've seen, if you stay committed to it, we've seen great progress already. It's been a blessing. And so what I was going to share is that we're already planting the seed with our son, that we're going to be the ones helping him through major decisions in his life, such as what college he's going to go to, what major, what spouse or girlfriend he's going to, go after, and even when it comes to financial issues, that we're going to be mentors. So we're planting that stuff already, and he's accepting of that. And that really does come down to an issue of trust, that he not only trusts us, but more importantly, that he trusts God, that God put us in his life to guide him through the major issues in his life.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that's excellent.
Did you have
I just-
anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, for those of you that have older kids or adult kids, if you are, well, first of all, 100% agree with Raul. Hopefully in the adult years, you have built trust so that your child is still wants to partner with you and be mentored by you. That is, I will say, when they move out of the house, that is something that we talked with our girls again about it, and just communicated that according to scriptures, we see that we're still supposed to be in their life, even in their adult years, according to Psalms or Proverbs. And so, our daughters agreed to welcome us in. So, so there's mentoring where you treat someone. I treat my adult children just like I would treat, Aaron or somebody else, right? Another adult woman. However, if I financially am paying for something for my child and they're abusing that privilege, I do have the right to take that away. And so, if you are financially supporting your kids, then you still have a say on what they have or don't have based on what you're paying. So, for example, just because they turned 18, let's say you are paying for their car, and yet they are consistently getting tickets, or they're mistreating the car. It's your car. You can choose to let them know that, hey, you're going to have to take the bus if you don't learn this virtue of self-control. Because, you try to help them first as an adult, but then they're going to lose the privilege because that's your car. And so, don't think just because they turned 18 that you don't have a say, but you do if you're financially supporting them. So, and one thing to just throw out there, if you're going to get your kid a car, now we talk, I think in our lesson on lesson 6, we do about even letting them get their driver's license, that's a privilege that should be earned based on their moral maturity to be driving a car. But also, I want to caution you on just giving them a gift of a car. You may choose to say, we bought a car and we're going to let you borrow it. And the only reason I say that is because, again, that is a very expensive gift. Even if it's used in a clunker, you want them to earn the freedom of having that car. And so that's just something to consider. You don't have to do that, but we didn't give our kids cars. We let them borrow our cars. And then based on their moral maturity, then they get to buy the car from us and earn it. So it's just an idea. Just to watch what freedoms you're giving them very, even at age 16, they might not be able to handle it. So, okay, moving on.
Okay, question 3 is the Salyers. How do I help my child understand that they're not ready to have a certain freedom when they believe that they should?
So I was gonna see if we could pass this to Ari, because she did such a great job in our last panel answering this question. I think that it would benefit everyone from hearing, and we can add certainly. But
Okay, go Ari.
All right, Ari, pressure's on.
Okay, I'll take a look at the question again. So I can gather my thoughts here.
Here, I'll read it to everybody. It's number 3. How do I help my child understand that they're not ready to have a certain freedom when they believe that they are or they should?
Okay, and this time I did ask my oldest for permission so I can share. My oldest, who is 16 years old, and a baby Christian, praise Jesus.
Amen.
He and I have had a lot of conversations since last year about the freedom to get a driver's license and a permit and to start that process. And we've talked a lot about what does that mean? What does that look like? And so I had shared with him the scripture in Luke 12:48, and just to summarize it, to he who much is given, much is expected. And so I had shared with him that there has to be some level of responsibility. He has to understand the entire responsibility associated with driving, not just the actual permit and the fun stuff that comes with driving, the cool stuff that comes with driving, but what does all that entail? And we have established that in our household, for that next step to be taken, in order for him to obtain his driver's license or his permit, he has to contribute. He will have to contribute to gas. He has to contribute towards insurance. And so how does he get there? And does he feel like he has the maturity to be able to obtain that freedom? And so he has on his own has determined that he's not there yet. He's working on it. He's taking steps towards it. He's looking for a job for the summer. So he's taking the steps to work towards that. But it is one of the things that I really wanted to impress upon my kiddos is that just because it is something that, and I didn't mention this in the last session, but just because it is something that society dictates, hey, in Texas, hey, you can get your permits, your learner's permits at 15, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are ready for that level of responsibility. And just as he sees his friends driving and obtaining a driver's license and so on and so forth, and some have vehicles, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is what's applicable to him, given his level of maturity.
Mhm.
So we continue to have these conversations and dialogue and very, very open about it, but he's come to a place where he feels like he is starting to see his growth, see his maturity, and he's taking the steps necessary to be able to gain that freedom someday soon.
Excellent.
Oh, excellent.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay,
good.
number 4, Salyers. What if my child states something to the effect of, well, how can I earn this freedom if you don't trust me by letting me have it? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think this question, I think we really need to look at that question and be like, okay, is there, because my immediate thought was like, oh man, maybe I need to reconsider. And I think our kids can ask these type of questions, and it's good to reconsider. But I think making sure they're not trying to manipulate the situation, and I think really praying for wisdom, I think is a good question, and it's a fair question, and we want our kids to be able to come to us and bring that to our attention, because we want to be partners with them at this age, and we want to really have those crucial conversations with them. But I think the questions that I would ask and pray about is what virtue is needed to have this freedom, and if we don't feel like they're ready, and obviously we know them best, and we would pray for a lot of wisdom and maybe ask advice from others. But I think that's important to really ask the question, is my son or daughter exhibiting the virtue that's needed to have this freedom, whatever the freedom may be?
Yeah.
And so just really, encouraging them. And I think like Ari shared, that's why I really wanted her to share. I love that example, but really working with them and just building them up and giving them confidence that maybe they're not ready yet, but we're getting there. We're going to help you get there. God can help you get there. Encourage them to pray about it, encourage them to study it out in scripture, and really walk with them and kind of have them focus forward and look forward to when they can have that freedom. But I think it's just at this age, we really want to, have our kids have the confidence to come to us and ask these questions. But then also ultimately God's put us in their lives to guide them. And if we really don't feel like they're ready, then they need to trust us. I think that's been said a lot, just really the importance of building that trust. And but we want to get them there, and we want to give them hope to that they're going to get it at some point, but just to really trust us. So I don't know, anything.
That's great.
Okay.
We're gonna answer a question real quick.
Yeah,
And then
so there was one asked by I don't know, chat,
It doesn't matter.
whatever that's called. So I'm just going to read it. One issue we are currently dealing with is one of our twins has earned privileges that the other has not. What recommendations do you have about having the difficult conversation with the child, letting them know that their sibling has earned or matured, but they have not?
Yeah, I mean, I'd write down like, what are the missing virtues or the things that you're identifying? What are your observations about the child who you don't feel is ready for that freedom? And make sure it's not based on judgment, that you really do have, I guess you could say, proof, and then you are just going to have to pull them aside and explain. I did not have twins, so I'm sure that's very difficult. I had daughters all 2 years apart, so they were still close enough that they would notice sometimes if they didn't get a freedom at the same time another one got one. And or the younger one would accidentally be getting freedoms too quickly just because it was easier. But I would just say what might really help your twins is understanding that you and your wife, or well, I know who sent the question. This was a man, but him and his wife, you probably have different freedoms. Dave and I do. So for example, if I turn on the oven, I make sure to make a note because I am characterized by forgetting to turn it off. Sometimes it's like an ancient oven that doesn't turn off on its own. And so I just don't remember things. And I know that sounds silly, but that's just one area of weakness for me, is I'm forgetful. So I have like alarms set on my phone. I just have different boundaries put in place to help me to remember things. Dave is very protective of his purity. He travels a lot. So when he goes to the hotel, he doesn't turn on the TV. Well, if I go to a hotel room, I turn on the TV. And we told our girls that we just, Dave will watch things through our accounts on his iPad, and his iPad has blocks, and I have the code to it. So you got to teach your kids that even as adults, we have different freedoms. There's many scriptures that talk about this, right? Some people can eat meat and some can't. And I mean, we have different freedoms and privileges just depending on where we're at. And what I really encouraged my kids with is, we want you to always have them, and we will do whatever as parents to get you there. So let's say one kid's able to drive, the other one, they just keep, not picking up after themselves. And so maybe that's what you decided. Stewardship is a quality, or maybe we'll just stick with stewardship. Then you talk with them about, well, what do we need to see change around the house in the area of stewardship in order for us to feel great about you driving our car? And don't compare them to the sibling. The sibling, maybe I have one daughter, she is just so orderly. Everything's always put away. She just came out that way. That was not something I taught. My other two, I had to work really hard to train them. And so it's not you don't want to shame the kids, but it's a fact of life. Some people have strengths and get to do things sooner than someone else. So I think it's all about your attitude and how you communicate it to the child, whether it's shameful, like you don't want to shame them. You want to have empathy, and then you want to relate to them as an adult and how you have limited freedoms compared to maybe someone else.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to highlight or add to that is, and you may be doing this already, but this is just for everybody on the phone, is part of what makes this type of parenting successful is when parents take the time ahead of time to process, okay, what freedoms are our kids approaching, or what freedoms do we want them to have, and what virtues do we think would be applicable to earning that freedom? And then you present that to the kids ahead of time. Now, this is not always possible. Sometimes a freedom is almost inadvertently granted, or you realize you've been allowing your child something that they weren't necessarily morally ready to handle. But to the extent that you can front load, it really helps these future conversations.
That was
Um,
Aaron's word.
Yeah, so
Aaron's word.
so I wanted to say that. The other thing is just a reminder. I don't remember which video we bring this up in, but sometime it is good to have a talk with your kids about their temperaments and their
Mhm.
temperamental God-given strengths
Lesson. Mhm.
and the associated weaknesses that come with those, because what that allows your child to do is to love themselves
Mhm.
in a godly way. It allows them to say, wow, that's really cool how God made me, and oh, I see how this weakness tags along with that strength. And just because you have twins doesn't mean they have the same temperament.
Yeah.
And so helping them to identify their God-given individuality, I think
That's
is also helpful. So those are just a few thoughts.
I also just wanted to let you know, on our resource page on the website, we have a virtue document. So I did not know what virtues really were. I kind of knew a couple, and I had to study those out because I realized, how am I supposed to teach my kid a virtue? I don't even know what virtues are.
Mhm.
I knew basic, like self-control, kindness, humility, but and it's not that you need to, there is a lot on that sheet, don't get overwhelmed, but you can just look through it and it'll just help you hopefully identify, oh, that's a virtue
that
and
applies to this.
that
word.
applies to this situation. And we give you the definition of the word, and we also give you tons of scriptures that you can study out with your kids. So that's just a suggestion.
Yep.
All
Which one
right.
did you want to go to?
Sorry, I
We were
jumped
at
ahead
5.
because I wanted to answer.
Okay.
Okay, let's just wait a second. I want to go ahead and have Aaron share. Let's do number 8. We'll come back if we have time. You want to read number 8?
So number 8, and then so then Aaron will go. It says, my child has ADHD. Should I give them consequences if I don't know whether or not they understand and or remembered the expectation?
And go ahead and introduce yourself, Aaron.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Oh, did I freeze?
No,
There we go. I am Erin Chavez. I'm here as a parent of adult kids. I have a soon-to-be 21-year-old and 19-year-old, but also my 21-year-old is diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So I'm bringing to you a special needs perspective. And this, you may not, I'm going to use the term diagnosis because we can talk about everything from what we consider small things like ADHD, dyslexia, all the way to autism, Down syndrome, other physical special needs. So I'm going to kind of give a little bit more here just as one kind of time frame. I just want to share a scripture that I hold really close to my heart as a special needs mom, and it says in Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may ... the rest, rule over the world and live life. And the important piece to me is just that even these kids, especially these kids, we have to view them as made in God's image, the likeness of God and the personalities. So to me, I tell my son who has autism, God has a bit of autism too. He must, in order for him to be made that way. So just maybe a note, a hopeful note there for you. But to answer the question, should I give them consequences? Absolutely. Children with different needs especially need structure and routine and restrictions, consequences, freedoms as they're appropriate. All of this information, all of this biblical parenting, everything, I smile because there's so many terms and words used throughout that definitely still apply. It's not different parenting. It's the how it is done is different.
Yeah.
And a lot of it takes from the parent first. Like it's extra time, it's extra patience, it's extra repetition. So going to the question specifically, giving them a consequences, if I don't know they understand, then you need to go back to the expectation, back to the help them understand, and not just telling. A lot of it is getting them to tell you in their own words what their understanding is, so that your consequence can be appropriate to what they do understand. What we're talking teenagers, your 15-year-old physically, if they have any kind of special needs, might be at a 14, 13, 12, or 10-year-old understanding. And so therefore the consequence has to be appropriate and understandable to that level versus the 15-year-old level. My son wasn't able to drive a car. He didn't get his license till he turned 20. He didn't want it. It was fearful, but I knew it would come with time. And it took a lot longer than it did for my younger son, who got his at 16 and a half, you know, so it was just super different that way. So to speak on the, you know, consequences, we found the best thing was really, like Tammy used the word, front loading. Before we went into a situation, as much as possible, we gave expectations. This is what we're working on. This is what we're working on. I'll give an example we had to work on with both our sons, but specifically our special needs sons, was when we got to someplace or someone came to our home, the interaction, what was expected then. And we used what we ended up calling HTH. And that was, first we say hi. And that included, in our family, looking in the direction of the person's face.
Mhm.
For autism, eye contact, I couldn't say look him in the eye, because that is a huge symptom that is a difficulty. But could he look at his forehead or nose or chin or chest? Like, look in that direction. Give the person your physical space, basically. The next was, thanks for having us over. Thanks for coming over. And then the third was, the other H was handshake, high five, or a hug. Because again, we had sometimes a handshake was enough. And that physical touch was more than enough. So a hug couldn't happen then, or they didn't feel safe or something like that. Even we, you know, high five or fist bump, something like that. So we had to include, I think we're used to like, look somebody in the eyes and you speak directly to them and you give a hug. We had to just modify those to be appropriate to his age and also the situation and the symptoms that he was dealing with in the moment. He might be completely overstimulated. And so a high five was a big deal to give. So that's just an example of like, not just having these blanket statements or blanket consequences for every action, but really analyzing and thoroughly kind of what's going on in the whole situation. There's always an antecedent, or what we commonly refer to now as trigger, for a behavior. And in a child with special needs, that's a symptom of their behavior, of their diagnosis. So I could go on and on and on, but yes, we need to, I think an important thing is, I don't know. Did I miss something I said last hour?
No, it was excellent.
Yeah, we just don't want to let our kids get away with or make excuses for them. If I constantly am telling, making excuses, oh, he has ADHD, oh, he has autism, that doesn't help him grow. That doesn't help him navigate his own strengths and weaknesses. It doesn't teach him anything God-given. And so we just have to base how we're speaking to them, how long it takes, the differentiating kind of modifications of how we go about it. Just this week, my 20-year-old was losing it in a scenario where we were giving him a consequence. You don't go to the gym, we're going to stop paying for it. You're going to pay for it. And he just, okay. So first, before we can deal with what you're doing, let's deal with the panic and the anxiety and the syndrome that's coming out of you right now. I literally sat him down, take deep breaths until you're calm. Now we can talk about why you know, why the consequence is hitting you so hard and what you can do about it. So just kind of maybe extra steps, a lot of extra steps in parenting with special needs.
That's so awesome. Yeah.
That's
I wanted to
excellent.
mention something real quick, Erin, that you mentioned earlier about the repetition every day about the
Oh,
shifts,
yeah.
I believe it was. I thought that was a really good example, and every single day you
Oh.
have to remind him.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I'll use my example of the high and the HTH that we used. We, if that was the thing that we were working on, we literally said that every single day that it came up. We're going to greet people when they come to our home. We would talk about it in the car on the way to church. This is what the expectation is when we get there, or the way to the birthday party, or to school, or it, instead of just saying they already know the expectation or they know what we're working on. They do and they don't. They'll just forget it. So that is a huge piece of just like, I can't just rely on like, oh, I told them Monday, or we worked on it for a full week. Now we're in a new week. They should be able to, there is no time frame for our kids on the, with any kind of needs in certain categories. Yeah. And it generally is, it goes to their temperament, it goes to their strengths, their weaknesses, like where do they just got to start noticing, like, where do they fall short on a typical general basis. I always knew my son was delayed in a lot of things. He didn't crawl till he was 13 months. He didn't walk till he was 18 months. So it shouldn't surprise me that he didn't drive a car at 16. Like, that's just his
Yep.
nature.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
That's
So
excellent.
awesome. Thank you, Erin. That is
You're welcome.
great.
Excellent.
Okay, we're going to jump to question 9, which is Phil. My son has been working on not letting his emotions get out of control while playing video games. He calms himself down on his own for the most part, but there are times when I have to go into the room and help him out. Then he calms down. Should there also be consequences? It's not like he's losing control every time he plays, so I'm not sure how to address this because he is getting better at it.
I actually added Phil's name. because
Oh, sorry.
Because last one Phil shared about you're a principal for vice principal, assistant principal for I know it's middle school, but do you mind sharing again what you had shared, and then I can share what
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this applies to, I mean, you know, I'm working with mostly 10 and 11-year-olds, but I would say I've worked with teens in the high school level as well, and they still would fall in this category as, you know, they get, you know, as they're growing, they're still maturing. This could be any game. This could be you know, a sport. It could be Gaga ball. It could be, I mean, it could be anything, video game. And essentially what I've recognized is that our kids need help. They need help navigating just their emotions and, yeah, competitiveness and just considering others. And they need people, adults, to be there to help guide them, which of course, you know, that's in a school setting. I always tell our teachers, like, you're not out there at recess to socialize. You need to get in there and help the kids set expectations and make sure that you're helping them, guide them through conflict. And so as parents, of course, and for this question in particular, I would tell the parent to make sure that you set expectations with your child before they go and play these games. Maybe even just, you know, help them, you know, do a devotional, do some Bible study on what virtue is, you know, is needed to keep our emotions in check, you know, whether it's self-control or something else. And I think that is so valuable. As a parent, we have that God-given, ordained from God, that we get the opportunity to teach our kids how to, you know, deal with those things, because they're going to come up again. You know, this is with a game, but it could be, you know, any situation that they come across at school or later in life and marriage. I don't know if anyone's ever gotten emotional with their spouse, and just, you know, situations come up, but I think we have the opportunity to teach our kids before in these situations, and we don't expect them to be perfect, of course. We want to look for, are they repentant? Like, okay, they did get, too emotional in their soccer game. Well, it's a training opportunity. I think that's probably one of the biggest things I've taken away from these classes is, conflict is an opportunity to teach. It's not necessarily, something that's an inconvenience. So I think just taking that opportunity to teach into whatever is, brought to the surface, and working that out with your child, and I think just parents being involved, like, even if they're teens, like, are they at a teen event and they're playing basketball? Well, are there any adults over there monitoring? I think us in this room need to be the ones over there, making sure we're over there helping, so that if something does arise, that we can talk to them about that. And because they're not probably capable of having that freedom quite yet to just play by themselves, without somebody potentially not doing it in a godly way, especially if, they're depending on their age. But most of the time, my experience is, high schoolers still need guidance. They still need direction. And of course, parents have that God ordained, responsibility. And so I think that's just a great opportunity. So I think I covered it. But yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on, so in the question, she says that there are times when he's getting upset, but she notices that he calms down on his own. I just want to remind you, every opportunity you have to, encourage your child on what improvements you're seeing, take that opportunity to tell them, say, hey, I heard you getting upset in the other room, but then I heard you catching yourself and getting self-control. I'm really encouraged to see how you're growing in this area. So remember, praise a lot, just like we like to be encouraged when we're improving in areas of weakness. Make sure when you see those things, you're highlighting them. And again, yeah, I mean, our kids will never be perfect. Like, we're not perfect, like Phil said as well. So I don't think you necessarily have to do a consequence. If you look at the decision tree that we made, it talks on there about have they done this multiple times the same day? Well, then yes, a consequence might be warranted. But was that the first time in a few days? I would say no consequence, because they just might need a verbal reminder again of the standard. I still, after, I don't know how many years I've been driving now, I still get in the car and mess up and get frustrated with somebody. So our kids will mess up. So not that they're saying they won't, but anyway. So next.
Okay,
need to answer.
number 6, should children have time limits on phones, video games, etc.?
Any activity, honestly.
Or any particular activity, but this question was about phones or video games. Salyers, you guys had signed up for that easy question.
Yeah, I would just say yes. Not
Period. Okay, we're done.
And I would say, I mean, we can just think of our own weaknesses. Do adults need this? Yes. And so if we need it and we have the Holy Spirit, and a little bit farther along, then of course our kids are going to need boundaries when it comes to all sorts of things, including phones. So I think the goal is to have boundaries, but to allow them to, as they get more mature, to take those boundaries away so that they can govern themselves as we lead them into adulthood, right?
Or maybe even coming up, like, collaboratively working together to create those boundaries, because they may always need those boundaries, just depending on
Correct, yeah.
what it is, you know what I mean? But I think just being vulnerable with your own children, like, I know for me, like, I share really openly with our kids about, like, yeah, I feel like I've been on my phone too much. I feel like I've been distracted. I haven't been present. I haven't been productive, and just, bringing them alongside you, knowing that they're not alone in the struggle, and that we ourselves are constantly having to reevaluate and set boundaries for ourselves, even as adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that those can be addicting and things, and so yeah, just talking through it, not shying away from having those conversations, and just praying for lots of wisdoms. I think Dave shared there's so many resources out there that you can put on phones and devices these days that are so helpful to still allow them to have it, because if they're driving, if they're out and about, we want them to be able to contact us. So, but we also want them to, not to have those safe things in place so that they can use this tool, and really teaching that it's a tool and not a toy, I think is important. Yeah, I think these are important conversations to have, not just laying down the law and saying you're not having a phone and just because I said so. Really explain the reason why that we have certain restrictions and freedoms, and those things are important.
Yep.
Excellent.
That's
Awesome.
great.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So-
So the next question, it says, her son loves playing online games that are free, but if you want to advance or get better equipment, you need to pay for them. Right now, we only allow him to spend money on one online video game that he has worked for and is monitored, and it's monitored how much and how often. Lately, he's been asking if he can spend $1 on another online game he plays. I told him I don't feel comfortable about this. The truth is, I'm already thinking the worst, that he will become addicted to spending and it could lead to gambling later in life. I don't want to act out of fear, not sure what response to give him. Okay, first of all, congratulations to this mom for identifying that she is feeling fearful, because if we don't identify what we're feeling and we react, we can often take away, hurt the relationship for sure, take away freedoms and privileges that shouldn't be taken away. So I think that's when we want to get advice. If something's bothering you, but you don't really know what to do, I would pause on it, don't do anything, and just get help, So I thought, anyway, that's really great that she identified that. And especially if you have things in your own past that you struggled with, it can be easy for you to project that onto your kid. So self-awareness is huge. So in this situation, though, what I wrote down is I would have a discussion with my adult child or teen about how much money they feel is appropriate to be spending on games in general. So, hopefully you're equipping your child with the right worldview, that this life is not about just entertaining ourselves to death. That's not what we're here for. And we're not here to spend money endlessly to fulfill needs or desires either. Like, that's not our worldview. And if you're not even setting or having discussions about worldview, I highly recommend, I love the book. Oh my gosh, what's its name? What's the name of it? Oh, I'm blanking. There's a book I recommend for that, but hold on, I'm blanking. So I'm going to write it down to get back to you. Darn it. Okay. Anyway, so worldview is just how your kid's perceiving their reality, right? And sometimes as parents, we just set them up almost for failure because we have built their worldview, we've allowed to become the American dream. And so when it comes to money and privileges, right, it's based on what everybody else is doing around them. And that's not what scriptures teach. So that's a side note. If anybody wants more help on worldview, I can send you some resources and we can talk about that. But back to this situation, assuming you have talked about the proper worldview, as I would ask them, say, so you have a job, you make so much money, how much do you feel comfortable spending in the area of buying games? And talk to your child about what they think, and then get your child to agree. You both need to agree to the amount, but you need to write it down. This is the final amount. And then you need to teach your child that we don't want to give in to desires at the moment. So that's why we set boundaries. So let's say he decided $5 a month is all I'm ever going to spend, but then he's getting caught up in the emotions and the excitement of the games that he's willing to spend suddenly $20, right? What you're doing is you're teaching him about real world problems for us humans, is that when we get excited or emotionally energized about something, we're willing to compromise our wise decision earlier we made and go make an unwise one. So that's why talk to your child about setting boundaries in their life for themselves. Write it down, so that you know how if you don't write it down, you forget and you're like, what did we decide and what did they decide? Just write it down. And then when they're tempted to compromise, what an opportunity to talk to them about how temptation could really pull us away from our goals or our boundaries. Because in that moment, the desire is so great.
So I just had one thing I
Oh,
wanted to
debauchery. I
to
was gonna
say
that.
about this, and then I just want to end with one final question, and that is,
Oh.
so think about this question for a second, right? I'm fearful that if I let my kid go down this road, it's going to end up in an addiction or gambling or whatever, right? But I would put before you that if this particular child was characterized by discipline with their time, by stewardship with their money, by living for others, for the benefit of others, if this child was characterized by these things, the mom might feel very differently about the child spending a couple dollars a month. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because it comes back to this: are you taking the time to figure out what virtues would make me feel good about this child possessing this freedom?
Mm-hmm.
If the child is lacking virtue, we will often feel fear.
Mm-hmm.
So don't stay in the fear like this, I guess mom did. I don't know who wrote the question, but like this individual did, they recognized that this was making them fearful. But the beauty is we don't have to stay there. We can then say, well, why am I feeling fearful? Is this really like a sinful thing that they're asking to do? Or is this something that virtue could create protection? Here's why I'm saying this. I shared this in our last class, and we'll wind down here. But our girls are all now out of the house. They all have phones. They all have some levels of social media. In fact, their whole campus ministry uses social media just to find out about their own gatherings and to share what's happening. It is not uncommon for our girls, not all at the same time, but one to come home and say, hey, mom and dad, I just wanted you to know that I'm fasting from Instagram for the next month because I've noticed that it's starting to affect my body image. And we'll say, oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. But that's what we want with our children, right? We don't want children that are afraid of themselves. We don't want children who put so many boundaries on themselves that they can't really exist in the world. We want kids who see that, like King David recognizes in the Psalms when he says, your boundaries for me have fallen in pleasant places, right? What a magnificent verse. There's someone with a healthy understanding of God's boundaries, right? We're trying to raise our children to be self-governing. And how beautiful that my daughter or daughters at separate times can recognize, you know what? I'm starting to not like my body. And it's because of what I'm seeing. So I need to extract myself from this for a while, get my mind healthy, and then I'll reevaluate. Oh my gosh, if I had done that in my 20s, what a different period I would have had of my life, right? So it's not about restriction, and it's not about, right? It's about training our children to think morally. If you wanted to say something.
Yeah, one thing that we did practically as well is when our kids were in high school, every week on Sunday night when we had our family time, we talked about their phone usage and asked them to pull up their record. You know how in your phone you can see your kids.
How much time were you on it? What were
yeah, I mean, you guys should all be knowing everything your kids doing on their phones, guys. You really should, because until they have that moral, maturity to be completely free, the world can get in there and really hurt them. But anyway, we would actually talk about it as a family. So not in a shameful way, we would just say, okay, let everybody look at how you did this week and what could you work out. Now, my kids were older, so actually 2 were in college at this time, still living at home, and then 1 was in high school. And I'd say, okay, well, what do you guys feel like? What did you do good? What things could you work on better with your stewardship with the phone? Because phones are just—
we would do the same.
Yeah, and we did the same. So phones are just so tempting, guys. They're just hard. And so we don't want to shame the kids, but we want to help equip them with self-control. And then, sometimes they'd look and be like, oh yeah, Netflix. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was on there for hours.
Right.
And it's okay they fail.
Yep.
What matters is what do we do when we do fail? Okay, so that's the end of this class.
Yeah,
Q&A
guys,
off,
so
but
yeah, thank you to everybody that participated on the panel. You guys
Give us
really
that.
are treasures, and we're super grateful for the time you put into answering these questions. But I also want to say thank you to everybody that took time out,
Mhm.
you know, on a Sunday night to join us. We do record these, so we post them. So
But we like seeing you, so don't.
yeah,
not
no,
feel
I
bad.
mean, we want you to be in person. I'm just saying that if you have friends in these classes who were unable to make it, please let
Yeah.
them know that these are posted and that they can be referred to at any time. We don't take them down. But thank you for your time. It really is an honor for us that you do this. And I hope you guys have a fantastic evening.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we missed a question.
How long does one keep working on consequences before it leads to frustration?
I probably would have to talk to you about that a little bit
To
more
understand
to
more
know
what
what
the
you
answer-
mean. So maybe you could text us more or call us because of time's sake anyway.
But just
Um,
give us an hour and a half before you call, because we have to do the 0 to 5s.
Oh yeah, we have another class right now. So love you guys. We'll talk to you
All right,
soon.
guys, love you. Have a great night.
Guys, love you.
Have a good evening.
Hi, guys. Thank you.